Myrte and me are partners for 8 years now, I think. And I'm very excited to be able to share some of her vast knowledge around intimacy and sexuality and healthy sex life practices. Because one of Myrte's vocation is a sexological body worker. And I was wondering if you could maybe explain what that is. What is the difference between that and being a sexologist?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a sexological body worker and somatic sex coach. And the idea is, well, I help people with all sorts of sexual problems, but it's in a much more somatic way. So somatic means of the body. And the idea is that instead of just talking about things, that you actually experience them. And with a sexologist, you sit across from each other, and you talk about an issue. And maybe you get exercises to do at home, but psychological body workers can also work with what we call one-way touch. So when it seems helpful for the learning of my client, then I can touch them to show them, to help them develop language. I can touch them in a specific part of their body. It doesn't need to be genital touch. It's more just about learning to describe, well, first of all, learning to feel sensations, because a lot of people are really blocked off, and then to describe them and differentiate. So I have a lot of clients that come to me and they say, oh, I don't feel anything. I feel numbness. I don't experience sexual pleasure or maybe sort of any form of pleasure. And then you can start very slowly with building up that sensitivity again. And usually it's from years of trauma, and it can be trauma with a small t, just, unpleasant sex, having 20 years of unpleasant sex with the person you're married to. That's going to cause a lot of numbness in your body. So we're kind of slowly trying to coax out, and when you start doing that, you gain new neurons. Your nerve endings start to become more sensitive, and you start to kind of develop the sense of, oh, actually, my body is still capable of all this pleasure, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I think it makes so much sense, the somatic approach, right? I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and I always say I'm a motor chauvinist. We have brains because we have bodies, because we move. And maybe talk therapy can help some people, but I'm a really big believer in somatic practices. And this sort of brings me to my next question around mindfulness, which you sort of started to touch on. But a lot of people, when they think about mindfulness, they think about meditating or relaxing. But you were talking more about awareness. So how does mindfulness connect to sexuality?
Well, I think what you need for a healthy sex life is an ability to have focused attention. And I'm sure everyone's listening, who is listening right now, can relate that focused attention in this day and age, it's become so difficult. We're always completely distracted. There's always something new coming in. We're sitting in front of computer screens, and all the stuff around us, it's made to grab our attention. Oh, ping, there's another text message that's coming in. Oh, the telephone goes. There's traffic noises out in the streets. But it's a way to go away from kind of your inner self, to use a bit of a spiritual term. And it's a protective mechanism also, all of this distraction. You feel a feeling that is not pleasant, and instead of feeling that, you grab your phone. And if you pay attention to that, you will notice that you're constantly doing this. You actually, the next time that you grab your phone to look at your messages, take a moment and think, oh, what brought this on? Is it really because I wanted to check my messages, or was there actually an uncomfortable thought that entered my head, and did I want some distraction from that? And with sexuality, a lot of unpleasant things happen. We need to be very vulnerable, and then if you get so used to protecting yourself from these unpleasant feelings, you're doing the opposite of what mindfulness is. You're shielding yourself off, and that's great in a way, because indeed you stop feeling unpleasant feelings and emotions, but the pleasant ones you're shutting down as well. So that with these practices, you learn to, without judgment, to just see, okay, what's happening in my body, what's going on, and to move through that. And with that awareness, yeah, it's something that you can learn, and it's hard.
It's super hard, and I think neuroscience terms what you were talking about as the dopamine system, right? This is there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions out there. So at least in the predictive coding framework, you see dopamine as a precision signal, which is telling you this is important, this is important. But it's a system that's very easy to hack, and in fact, the creators of a lot of these social networks and our technology have hacked that, because we get these random pings, and whenever we get a random reward, sometimes we get it, sometimes not, right? Sometimes the message might be from you, and I'll be like, oh yay, I got a great message, but
mostly it's a message from Facebook saying someone liked your post.
Yeah, or my bank account, or someone trying to sell me car insurance, right? But I still keep going to it because maybe I'm gonna get the message that gives me that reward, and that is what is hacking our dopamine system. And actually, with building wisdom, we try to take that into account and to allow us to actually use this dopamine system towards being mindful and noticing what's happening with us, because we're creating a new type of feedback that really I haven't seen really anywhere else as a product, between our heart rate, which is an internal signal that we're not very aware of. I'm definitely not very aware of unless I'm like really running, to visual light. So wisdom becomes more bright pink when you're more excited and your heart rate goes up, and it goes blue when you're calmer. And that type of new feedback, again, will activate your dopamine system because it's novel and it's a type of reward signal that can then hopefully help you actually learn to internalize these feelings and what is happening inside of you. So that's at least, yeah, our hope and goal with this. And you are helping us write a lot of the rated R cards, which I'm very excited about. And to be frank, we've been testing this out in various sex positive places, play spaces, and it's really fun to see how excited people get to put this on their finger and to explore. How does the heart rate, change when you touch somebody this way or when you kiss them? And it's really a social signal that otherwise is hidden from us. Like, I don't know what's going on unless I'm really like touching somebody really and feeling their heart rate. I can't really tell. And by having this as a signal, it really creates a really interesting environment where people can participate and communicate what's going on internally, even without any words, which is really cool. So maybe we can just, talk a little bit about the cards and which cards we like the most and the ideas behind them. Yeah?
Yeah.
You want to start?
Sure. Well, what is your favorite card?
My favorite card. Okay. I think it's a card that you wrote, one of the last cards actually, that had a really big effect on me. It's a card about what would you communicate to your earlier self. And at what age would you communicate? And then you get to use wisdom and really imagine that you're talking to yourself and trying to stay calm and reparent yourself. And I think reparenting is a tool that's used in a lot of places in therapy. But for me, I've never thought of that in the sexual context of like reparenting the early beliefs that I got from a very conservative family, that they get stuck in there, and even when we can talk later about like psychedelics and everything, but there's still some things around shame, very early age shame around masturbation. And when I read that card, I was like, yeah, that's definitely what I would do. I would really try to talk to my sort of 5-year-old self and just tell her it's okay to enjoy your body. It's your body. You get to enjoy it. But, maybe just do it somewhere where it's private and you can actually connect to yourself. Something like that. And I think that was, something that I'm going to continue practicing, because I feel that child self, it would have been great if I got that. And I did it, and we can actually do this for ourselves. So yeah, that was my favorite card.
Yeah, great. And I think that reparenting is there also we feel the shame around sexual pleasure, but I think often we feel the shame also about horrible things that happen to us, that people cross our boundaries. And when you're in an environment where sex in general is so shamed, what are you going to do with that pain that you feel because you had an unpleasant experience? Can you go to your parents and say, hey, this awful thing happened to me? Or are they just going to be yelling at you because you had sex in the first place? So you can also now be that person for yourself to say, okay, you are safe now. What do you need to feel okay? And the painful emotions that are coming up, they're all right. You don't have to feel judgment about that shame. You can just look at it and hold it um, and sit with it. Mostly that's all negative emotions want from us, that we just sit there and see them, and then they can move away.
Yeah, I think that's really cool that you can actually see the nervousness, right? With wisdom, that you can see, okay, I am actually really stressed about this, and sit with it until it goes away and you can go back to your baseline. Because you can't really, like, the moment you're in fight or flight, your cortex gets disconnected. You're back to that lizard brain, you don't have as many options. And I think that's when you were talking about guilt and shame, it's also really important to understand that this is what happens in situations of fight or flight, or freeze in this case. Your brain can really just shut things down and you don't have these options. And you need to learn to forgive yourself, know that it's not, this is how our biology works. And I hope that this does help people. Like, I'm actually excited to get more feedback when we are on the market, which is a good time to do a plug-in. How about that? So if you do want to get one of the early wisdom units, we're in pre-sales now. We're going to start shipping them around April. And this is the link and the QR code that you can go to the site and buy a unit. So now it's your turn. What's your favorite card, or one of them?
Yeah, I like a lot of them. So maybe it's good to explain that we have 3 different categories. Category of self, things that have to do with your own inner life, your past, your thoughts, feelings. A category of environments, which has a lot also to do with nature and animals, and how does the whole how do other creatures relate to sexuality, and how do you relate to their sexual practices. There's a great question in there of are there things in nature that turn you on? I have it actually with the monolith here. It's such a powerful
sort of symbol.
Yes. Yeah, and it
feels like a vaginal opening in that. Yeah.
Yes.
Post pictures later of that. We're in Mexico next to a very beautiful monolith.
And it feels like a sturdy thing. It's like, okay, it's been here since time immemorial. It's gonna be here. It will hold me, and that's all I want in a sexual partner, to feel like, oh, this is someone who can hold me, where I can, who can create this safe space for me, where everything can happen. And then when you have that grounding, like what the monolith is doing, and I think we've been having pretty amazing sex. Maybe it's all thanks to the monolith. You can grow, you can learn, you can reach really far. But when you don't feel safe, you contain yourself. And I think this card is nice inspiration for that. Go out in nature and also learn out, like, where in nature do you feel safe, and all of this learning you can then apply to your sexual life. All these systems are so interconnected.
Yeah, and the second category is also about community. About like we talked about things like shame that might have come in through your community, how to communicate within your community. Which brings me to another card I really liked. Was a card about practicing boundaries and saying no. And I think that's super important. I think for all genders, I think there's different types of pressures perhaps to say yes or to not say no. And I think there's a sentence that I love that, if you can't say no, your yes isn't.
It doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything, yeah. So, and it's really hard to break that socialization and to be able to practice saying no with wisdom and staying calm and seeing, like, okay, the first time I say no or stop, I feel nervous, my heartbeat goes up. But as you continue to practice, you can regulate yourself and it becomes really easy. And I've been very lucky. I've been, a self-defense instructor since I was a kid, doing martial arts. My no's are very strong and easy for me. And I've almost taken it for granted until I've noticed growing up that this is really something that I was lucky enough to get trained in an early age. And I think it's really, really important. And you can do it at any age. If you don't have it early in life, it's a skill that I think will really improve relationships, not only sexually, it's also really important sexually, but also the ability, if your partner asks you for something, to say like, no, that's too much.
Yeah,
That's
and it
super
increases trust. And
Yeah.
that's a huge thing. Like interpersonal trust is the foundation of our society. But if we cannot trust that someone's yes or no is authentic, then what is even the point? And then there's all these cultures, these politeness cultures of like, oh, it's the right thing to do to go along. But when you do that in the sexual realm, it's so problematic that someone's like, oh yeah, can you give me a blowjob? And you're like, well, okay, it would be impolite to say no. But then before you know it,
laughing out of nervousness.
Or maybe you're laughing because you're like, I would never
No,
give a
that's
blowjob
okay.
out of politeness.
I feel the nervousness, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very problematic.
Yeah,
especially when you want to please someone. I
Yeah.
want, like, when I love someone and care about them, I want them to have a good time.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a really important balance to learn internally. When is it a gift? And when is it, I'm doing it out of pressure or obligation? And I think that's really, important training that you're teaching me about the wheel of consent. And
Yeah, so that's credit Betty Martin for this, who developed the wheel of consent, and she divides touch up in these 4 dimensions. Giving, so I'm doing something to your body for your pleasure, or taking, I'm doing something with your body for my own pleasure. I love touching your hair, love touching your boobs, all great things. And then maybe you are allowing that touch. So you are doing something with your body for the other person. And you can also then be on the other side of giving, so receiving or accepting, like receiving the gift from the other person who is giving for you. So then you are doing something with your body for your own pleasure. And these questions are really important. First of all, who is it for? And who is doing it? And then, I think wisdom can also help you parcel that out as you go through some of these questions, and to really think about, what are these interpersonal dynamics at play here?
I think allowing for me was also like a bit of a, mind, that there's agency in allowing. And that's the really important part, that I am aware. Maybe it's not like the most amazing feeling for me, but it is for my partner. And that's okay if I actually notice this and allow this and feel the agency in that, versus the passive, like, okay, I'm being dragged along into this. And I think that's super important line where, okay, you're gifting an allowance. And that was like, oh yeah, you could do that. I'm not that good at that, maybe. That's less me, but it's something that I can practice and be more aware of, and sort of see where that takes me.
Yeah, and these lines are so blurry. Where does allowing become enduring? And then also to be able to tell the other person, like, okay, I've been giving you this blowjob for the past 15 minutes and now my jaws hurt and I would like to do something else. And for the other person to be graceful about that and to say, oh, wow, thank you for telling me that. I don't want your jaws to hurt, and let's go do something else now.
Yeah.
There's
we
so
have
much freedom in that.
One of the cards is also about rejection, right? So when that happens, not to take that as a rejection, but to take that as okay, this is the other person's wants, and learn how to accept that. Which can be difficult sometimes if you have experienced rejection in the past, to not see a current situation as rejection. Yeah,
and I think you can. It's also something that you can practice. And I really like this in the bodywork training, that when we learn that when a client gives us feedback, that we always say thank you. So if they say, oh, that's a little too hard, you don't say sorry, because sorry can also be. Then they feel like, oh, I made the other person feel bad, there's something wrong. But when you just say thank you, all there is gratitude. Like, wow, you said something about your bodily experience, and that is a gift for me, because now I know better how to do my work. And with partnered sex, it's also a gift. The other person can feel like, wow, okay, now I know where you're at. It's an incredible gift, and it's so much harder. It's so much harder to say no than to go along. And so I think there really needs to be an appreciation of the work that the other person had to do to get to that no.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And a question, a lot of people who have been working on this project have been assigned female at birth. And we talked about, these definitions, and I'm using this word because some of us maybe don't feel female or woman, we're more, non-binary. But what does, being put into these boxes do to our sexuality? And based on your work, do you see, difference in these boxes? Of course, generalized, but and then the type of mindfulness work that maybe each person that was put into these boxes can orient themselves to.
Yeah, I see huge differences, and people who have been socialized as women, they learn, or rather, we learn. I've been socialized as a woman too. We learn that this endurance, this allowing, this going along, that's a positive thing, and to be so. We're not allowed to be assertive. We're not allowed to speak up. We have to always play nice. Take the volatility out of situations by smiling.
And even not hitting on people, right? Like, oh, if you're the one that's pursuing someone, something might be not okay with you. At least this is the feedback.
Yeah, like the slut shaming.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to sit there like pretty little wallflowers until someone deems us worthy enough to pick us up, and then we let them do with us whatever they want, because they've been socialized as men, and therefore we're supposed to kind of give up our will. And maybe in some ways this feels, it's easy to be like, okay, well, we don't live in a society like that anymore, but this imprinting, there's such subtle things. Just the fact that when we speak up, people tend to talk over us more, and we're not so aware of it. But at some point it starts to kind of grind you down. Like, okay, my voice is not important. My safety is not important. I'm not really allowed to be here, and you carry all of that with you. And I think that's so with people who have been socialized as women who come into my practice. What I see there is mostly the effects of this lifelong endurance. So these are clients that experience a lot of numbness, and just they say, oh, I cannot orgasm, or I just don't feel anything, or I don't have any pleasure from sex, or I don't know how to get the pleasurable experiences that I want, and I always end up in these harrowing situations. And then very different things go on with clients that have been socialized as men. And I'm generalizing, of course, but I do see these patterns that for people socialized as men, it's much more being cut off from feelings, or compulsive, what we call maybe sex addiction, although that term is a bit controversial, but a compulsivity that comes into sexuality, which is again a big form of distraction, and not being present in the body. So you see that with
or like performative. Or
also that the pressure of, okay, I need to to be in this taking or giving energy all the time, but receiving is sometimes a thing that really allows you to be present in your body. It's funny that in the Wheel of Consent parts you can kind of put, they are kind of gendered, women tend to learn passivity, men tend to be sort of pressured into this active role, which sometimes really doesn't suit them at all.
I think this is part of why personally I really feel non-binary, because I never fit into that. From however I was socialized mostly by my dad, who I think wanted a boy to train in martial arts, and I feel that I'm different than a lot of people who have my body type and biology. And it's given me a lot of freedom, but also I get a bit of the opposite side of it's harder for me to just be receiving and passive, and so it's I think the idea to be a whole human is to be able to play any role. And one of your cards, that's another one that I really liked, is like, what is your default role? And try to get excited about maybe exploring something that isn't your default role, and allow yourself to be something that isn't what you've always been, and try it out. Maybe it'll be a good fit, maybe not. But if you don't try, you will be stuck in the same patterns.
Yeah, and not everyone needs to be everything. You always have something that is more of a default where you feel more comfortable in, and that's also completely okay. But it's also good to have awareness about that, to think, okay, I'm a top. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And indeed, to question a little bit what else is there, without having to be like, oh, well, I better learn to be a bottom, otherwise I'm not a full human. No, you can be a top and be proud of that, and it's great. But yeah, be playful about it.
Yeah, for me at least, it's about allowing to explore. It's not necessarily you will be at the end, there's no necessarily even end goal to this exploration, but this sort of relates also to psychedelics, and maybe we can pivot to that, because psychedelics sort of let us put down these boundaries, and maybe boundaries isn't the right word, more psychedelics allow us to break down our previous behavior patterns to allow things that have been under there maybe, but we've been squishing them.
Yeah, so it increases awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it increases awareness in the present moment, and that's why we always say psychedelics, be super careful with the setting that you're in, because it will magnify that setting. And anything that's around sexuality, it's so important to have consent in normal situations, and the moment you involve any type of substances, that really requires even more sensitivity. But how does that sort of relate to sexuality in your work? Or have you seen, one of the other things that Myrte does is she also facilitates psychedelic ceremonies. So I'm curious if you have seen or know about sort of effects that people have using psychedelics around their sexuality.
Yeah, I think it's easiest to just speak about my own experiences, where psychedelics have helped me to go into this state where all of a sudden expressing my needs and stating my boundaries were the easiest thing in the world. And it has something to do with empathy, I think, that you feel empathy for yourself, and that you also realize the effect on the other person, and kind of this, because you're both kind of in the same, if you do this with other people, you're on the same thing, and what you're feeling, they're probably feeling. So this damaged ego that always is feeling rejected and always is feeling like, oh, I need to protect myself. That can, in the right setting, it can just kind of be gone. Yeah, it goes to sleep. It's like, oh, I can let the other parts play now, and then there's so much movement and freedom. And and you study the neuroscience behind it a lot, but that's the wonderful thing about psychedelics. It's not, if you do your integration well, it's not just that, oh, you have a fun time and then you go back to consensus reality and everything is as it was. No, it's you learn something about yourself, and then when you are in other settings, you can use this learning and apply it there, and you can think back and be like, whoa, what did it feel like when it was so easy to tell a person, oh, I would really like you to rub my feet right now. Or, oh, that feels great. And then 5 seconds later to say, oh, it doesn't feel great anymore, but pat me in my head.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel great anymore. Bring me a strawberry. And for the other person to at some point say, I'm kind of done with bringing you strawberries. I'm going to go play over there. And for you to feel like, oh yeah, of course, go play. I'm gonna get my own strawberries, and it's so liberating.
Yeah. To for me, it's more, I think, the inner talk that's always blah, 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 and like you say, hard to be present. There's always like 10, 15 different threads: work, life, environment, friends, family, da 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 da. And when you're trying to have sex, that's not always optimal. You want to actually be present, and that can help. Just okay, now everything's in that activity because the other things have been destabilized and not getting. Again, you're more sensitive to the environment. So if you're in a sexual environment, that will actually help me be more coherently sexual.
Yeah, and what also helps with that is to be less goal oriented. And but that's another really hard thing about our society, that everything kind of needs to have a purpose, and then we have this sense of, oh, if we have sex, the goal is that well, in the worst case scenario, that the penis never gets off, and that there is penetration, and then that's it. In the a better case scenario, there is penetration and you both get off. But there, and then when that doesn't happen, there can be feelings of shame, or like, oh, and there's performance anxiety. But for both, well, for all genders, I think that plays a role. Like, oh, the thing needs to happen. And of course, people that are not cis and not straight, they tend to be a lot better about knowing, okay, sex is about, it's so much broader than just this penis and vagina stuff. So actually, they know something that straight people unfortunately often have to figure out the hard way and struggle with for 40 years before they realize, oh, actually, there's a lot of other forms of pleasure that are just as valid and just as sexual as sticking a penis into a pussy. But that's where the difficulty can come in, this feeling, because something needs to happen, and then that makes you feel too vulnerable or anxious, and then you go into the distraction mode. That's why you start watching the ceiling and thinking about your grocery list, because you feel like sex is supposed to be one thing, and it's not that. It's probably not that pleasurable the moment that you start looking at the ceiling and thinking about the grocery list, but you don't feel like you have the means to change it. And probably you have some kind of idea about yourself, like, oh, but if I tell my partner that actually I don't want penetration right now, then the sex is over. But sometimes all that is necessary for sex is presence. You know, genitals don't need to be involved.
Breath play, just breathing together, can be very powerful.
Yeah, and there's some intersections with tantra, of course, as well, to just to have an exchange of energy, which can, you can learn also to increase this arousal.
Did you say energy? I think thermal energy. But there's different, or visualization, right? Having the same imagery that we can pass through to each other. Or the energies that you might believe in. I'll try to keep an open mind. Okay, I think we've been going at this for a while, which is super fun. Maybe do you have any last words of wisdom for people that might be watching?
Well, maybe it's good to explain a little bit. So we have our finger sensor here. So you basically connect yourself to wisdom. And then you can play around with these cards, ask each other questions. You can also do it by yourself. It's really nice to have a meditation moment at the start of your day. Pick a card, think about the answer, and then go about your day, or use the cards as prompts to do journaling. They're great to do with a partner. They're also great to do with friends.
The rated R maybe with close friends.
And there's a mind and a play section to every card. So the mind section is more about, okay, well, think about this, and then in the play section you can start to
more goal oriented, of like trying to
what are little exercises. And you don't need to reach the goal. It's more see, can you upregulate, can you downregulate?
Yeah.
And then the wisdom gives you this biofeedback, which can be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks. We probably should have done that at the beginning, but better late than never. And yeah, if you want to know more, we have a whole website with a lot of the science behind this. This was designed by Kareem Rashid. Yeah, any questions also, we're here to answer. Feel free to send us. And if you do come to Amsterdam and want some of Myrte's amazing experience and expertise, this is a link to her website. Highly recommended, obviously. And yeah, hope everyone had a good time. Do we have something in the chat? No, we're good. Okay, well, have a good night, everyone, and
Thanks,
hope we
everyone.
gave you some food for thought around sexuality and mindfulness. Bye.